I'll put you on the spot a bit here. What are the three biggest challenges that you feel you face as PM this term?
Well, the economy, of course, is always front and centre, because if you don't get the economic outcomes right, it's more difficult to achieve your social or environmental agendas. So there are pressures from international quarters in some cases. The inflationary pressure is coming in part as a result of what is happening globally, including the Russian invasion of Ukraine. So that is a pressure. The second, of course, is at the strategic competition in our region, with China being more forward-leaning. That will continue to be something that we are focused on in the region. And the third pressure, which is there, goes to very much related to the first, is in general cost of living pressures. How we take pressure off people, and there are a range of ways in that exhibits itself. Housing costs, childcare costs, healthcare costs, all of those measures. And that's why the position that we took to the election, we're determined to implement, to make childcare cheaper, to take pressure off pharmaceuticals, to take pressure off healthcare costs, to deliver on housing policy across the board, making it easier for people to get into home ownership through the various programs that we have, but also investing in social and emergency housing as well.
When do you think the Voice referendum will be, and how do you feel about the prospects of its success?
Well, I certainly hope that it is this term is the government's intention. And what I want to do, though, is to maximise the opportunity of success. I deliberately am not being overly prescriptive here, because I want people to have that sense of ownership. I don't want this to be our proposition or my proposition. So we're out there consulting Indigenous Australians. I was in the Torres Strait this week. It will be an element of discussion on the sidelines of the Jobs and Skills Summit in a fortnight. I've been engaging with business and churches. It's also important, I believe, to get as wider possible support across the Parliament as can be achieved. And I've had constructive discussions with Peter Dutton, with Adam Bant, with other crossbench members as well, about the importance of this going forward. And I certainly think that there is momentum there. I believe if we don't get on with it during this term, that momentum can be lost.
And
it's way back in 2017 that the Uluru Statement came forward.
Sure.
That's 5 years ago.
Do you think you can get Peter Dutton over the line here?
Well, it's not a matter of me getting him over the line. I would ask that he consider what's been put forward. When we first discussed this issue, he indicated to me that he wasn't clear what the question might look like. That is one of the motivations that I had for going to Gama and proposing the draft question, which is out there for discussion, as well as what the constitutional change would look like. When it comes clear, there are just two things really being considered here. One is recognising Indigenous Australians in our Constitution, in our national birth certificate. That is important. And secondly, then, is making sure that we have consultation with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples when matters affect them. It's not usurping of the Parliament at all.
If you were to sell it, though, how will it change outcomes for Aboriginal people in Australia?
You will get better outcomes when Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people have a sense of ownership over decisions which are being made, when they're properly consulted. If you want to improve housing, health and education outcomes, as well as close the gap on life expectancy, don't make those decisions in Canberra in isolation from asking the people who'll be directly impacted by those decisions.
So far, the government's got what I would call a flurry of consultation papers and reviews underway. Is there a danger in this? Because it takes a while for those reviews to come back. Are they about building a case for reform? Why summits? Why reviews? Why this process at the moment?
Well, we want to be an inclusive government, and we made that very clear during the election campaign. We want to bring Australians with us on the journey of change, but it hasn't stopped us introducing legislation and for example, on our emissions target of 43% reduction by 2030, and on that framework has already gone through the House of Representatives. We've already introduced legislation for 10 days paid domestic and family violence leave, for the creation of Jobs and Skills Australia, for a range of our program and our agenda. So our task is to get on with that agenda, pass that legislation, which we are doing, but secondly also to set Australia up for what are the next lot of reforms being done, how are people included in that process going forward, and I think that's a positive thing. I think that's a strength. Through collaboration, you'll get better outcomes. So I'm very hopeful, for example, at the Jobs and Skills Summit, that we can get agreement between employers and unions about their common interests. And in order to do that, you've got to get people around the room and to make those decisions in the common interest, which is there.
In saying that, it sounds like you're after something like the Prices and Incomes Accord that Bob Hawke produced. Is that what you're hoping for out of this summit?
I think no, we're not as ambitious as that. That was the right policy for the right time. But what we are interested in is making sure that we can have improvements in enterprise bargaining, that we can focus there on productivity, and we can focus on ways in which business and unions come together.
All right, just a couple of questions to go. The electric cars is one of the discussion papers. Do you expect sometime in the 2030s for the sale of new petrol-run cars in Australia to end?
Look, that will be decisions made by the companies involved. But what we know is that all the research isn't going into internal combustion engines. It's going into electric vehicles and low emissions vehicles. That is what the Japanese, the European, the American suppliers are all doing.
I want to ask quickly about a federal ICAC. You had a crack in the House at one point at Angus Taylor saying he'd be looked at by other bodies. What do you think he's on the hook for? And would it look at things like pork barrelling, or would it look at just personal corruption, personal enrichment, if you like?
Well, I think that a National Anti-Corruption Commission should look at serious and systemic corruption, and it shouldn't be directed by politicians, including by the Prime Minister, as what it looks at. It should be independent of political interference.
Now, President Xi and President Putin have indicated they are going to attend the G20 at the end of the year. Does that make you look at that forum with some trepidation, and are you considering a trip to America before then?
Look, I will be attending the G20, and that's important. It's an important event for our friends in Indonesia to be hosting, and I made that very clear. I don't believe that we should allow such an important international institution to be undermined. And just as you might recall, Vladimir Putin attended here in Australia when we hosted, I think that we'll wait and see what actually occurs and who attends that summit, but certainly I've made it clear that Australia will be attending. There's a range of important events as well, including the East Asia Summit that will be taking place around about that time. We haven't made a final decision about a visit to the United States. I have been invited by President Biden, but we'll work that through, and at some stage in the future that will occur, whether it's this year or next year. Certainly next year, President Biden, I'd expect, will be in Australia along with Prime Minister Kishida and Prime Minister Modi for the Quad Leaders meeting that Australia will be hosting next year.
And just finally, it's the first time I've interviewed you since the election. Hopefully we can do it again, but people have seen a quite confident Prime Minister since you were elected. In the campaign, you had a few moments, including with me and the unemployment rate. Did you have what's in sporting terms called the YIPs during the campaign?
I'm not a commentator, Andrew. We won the campaign. We had 3 debates, and I think I won all 3 of the debates with Scott Morrison. We were focused on getting to 76 seats, and we exceeded that with 77. And I think it was a very successful campaign. But it was a campaign where during it, I said I was focused on 2 dates. One was May 21, but the second was the election in 2025. And by that I meant that I had a very clear view about what a first term agenda for an incoming Labor government would be if we were successful. And that's what I'm now setting about implementing. I did have a clear idea of what I wanted to do in government, and we're doing just that.
Prime Minister, thanks so much for your time.
Thanks very much, Andrew.